It was the kind of winter night that makes a man question whether the world is still listening to him, and as the train rattled across the frozen wetlands outside Silverbrook, I kept replaying the voicemail my daughter allegedly sent me. 8 seconds of hollow hostility that wasn't her voice at all. 8 seconds that sliced through my chest, sharper than any knife I'd carried during my 35 years, restoring derelict buildings across this forgotten stretch of the country. And even now, while the conductor called out last stops and passengers shuffled restlessly in their seats, something inside me whispered that nothing about that message fit the woman I raised. She would never tell me to stay away, never call me a burden, never sound so cold, and the more I analyzed that recording, the more my gut twisted because beneath the fake calm tone, I sensed danger, real danger, like a faint rattle under the floorboards before a building collapses, and that instinct, the one that had saved my life more times than I'd ever admit, was the same instinct now screaming that my daughter's disappearance from her routine was no accident, that someone else had taken her phone, someone who wanted me gone, someone who hoped I'd ignore the warning signs and go to sleep like any tired old man. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. And as the snow beat sideways against the window, I whispered into the cold glass, "Emma, I'm coming." Because even if the whole world told me to mind my business, a father doesn't abandon blood. Not when fear coils in his lungs. Not when the streets themselves feel like they're holding their breath. And if you're listening to this right now, don't you dare look away because what happened next is something every parent should hear. And if you've ever felt that tug in your heart that something is wrong in the shadows, then stay with me till the end. And hey, before I forget, hit that subscribe button because this story isn't just a tale. It's a warning carved out of the darkest winter I ever lived through, and you'll want to hear every second of what follows. I promise you that. Now, back to the moment the train jolted to a halt just outside the city limits of Greybridge, a place where the fog crawls low over the streets and secrets slip between the cracks like oil, a place Emma had moved to after landing her dream job, designing restoration plans for historic districts. A job she loved so much that she'd call me every Sunday to tell me about the stubborn timber beams she had to reinforce or the ancient sandstone arches that threatened to crumble under their own weight. And each time she spoke, her voice carried that spark she inherited from her mother. But in the last 3 weeks, those Sunday calls had stopped, replaced by short, stilted texts that didn't sound like her. Messages stripped of her warmth and her punctuation. Messages that felt as robotic as the voicemail that arrived last night. The voicemail where someone pretending to be my daughter said, "Don't come here, Dad. I don't need you. Just let me live my life." Except the pauses were wrong and the tone too flat, as if someone were reading a script they didn't understand. And all of that would have been enough to worry any father. But what pushed me over the edge came 5 minutes later when I called her office and her supervisor whispered, "Mr. Hale, Emma hasn't shown up all week. We thought she was with you." And the way her voice trembled made ice drip down my spine, because no one in Greybridge trembles unless they've seen something they're afraid to name. And in that moment I knew. My daughter wasn't ignoring me. She was missing, maybe trapped, maybe hurt, maybe worse, and someone wanted me far away. But I've restored burned-out houses, crawled through collapsed basements, dug through rubble with these hands, and I wasn't about to let fear keep me from tearing apart every wall necessary until I found her. But even then, I didn't know just how deep this would go, or how many people were involved, or how the moment I stepped off that train, I'd already stepped into a snare stretched tight across the entire district. A snare built by men who hid behind city contracts and charity boards and historical commissions. Men who smiled for the press but rotted the city from the inside like termites chewing through load-bearing beams, and every one of them underestimated one small detail, that an old man with a spine full of stubbornness and a heart full of love is the most dangerous kind of man, especially when he's already lost too much to lose anything else. And as my boots hit the frozen platform and my breath fogged in the night air, I swear the wind itself whispered a warning through the steel rafters above me, urging me to turn back, to go home, to pretend. None of this was happening, but I tightened my scarf, pulled my old knapsack closer, and pushed into the dimly lit station where a flickering monitor displayed canceled trains, and an attendant eyed me with something I later realized was pity, because word travels fast in cities like Greybridge, faster than sirens, faster than gossip, faster even than fear. And somewhere in that labyrinth of alleys, abandoned workshops, and half-restored buildings, my daughter was waiting, whether she knew it or not, and I made myself a promise right there on that platform. I would not leave this city without her. I would stand against every rotten beam, every corrupt official, every shadowed threat, and I would carve a path through this darkness, even if I had to do it alone. And trust me, you're going to want to listen closely, because the night I stepped into Greybridge was the night everything changed, not just for me, not just for Emma, but for everyone who believed danger hides in the dark. Sometimes danger hides in the daylight, wearing a badge, a smile, and clean shoes. And before this story ends, you'll understand why I say that. So stay with me, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't blink, because what comes next still keeps me awake at night. The cold followed me like a shadow as I crossed the station's exit and stepped into Greybridge's night, the kind of night that feels stitched together with secrets, the kind that makes every echo sound like a warning. And while I walked toward the district where Emma rented her loft, I kept scanning the streets as if expecting her to appear from behind one of the fog-soaked corners. But the only figures I passed were bundled silhouettes moving quickly, avoiding eye contact, as if the city itself had taught them to keep their heads down. Even the lamps buzzed nervously, dimming and brightening as though something unseen fed on the electricity, and every block made my pulse thicken, because my father's instinct, stronger than fear, stronger than fatigue, kept nudging me forward, telling me I was close to something, though I didn't yet know if that something was hope or danger. And hey, before I go further, if you're listening to this, don't forget to subscribe, because what I'm about to share isn't just a story. It's a descent into a world that hid right beneath our feet, and you'll need every detail to understand what happened next. The further I walked, the more the buildings changed from modern concrete to restored brickwork, the kind Emma used to admire. But tonight, instead of pride, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach because the streetlights didn't reach the ends of the alleys, leaving them submerged in a murky darkness where anything or anyone could be waiting. And when I reached her building, an old warehouse restored into lofts with large arched windows, the first thing I noticed was the unnatural stillness, the kind you find in places people have abandoned, not physically but emotionally. And as soon as I pulled the lobby door, a sour scent of damp wood and cleaning fluid hit me, a sign someone had tried to cover up a smell. And if you've ever renovated buildings, you know that cleaning chemicals usually hide rot, or something worse. I walked up the stairs, every groan of the old steel frame echoing through the stairwell. And as I reached her floor, my breath hitched because Emma hated dim hallways. Yet the bulbs here flickered faintly, like dying fireflies, revealing just enough to make the shadows twitch. I knocked on her loft door. Nothing, no footsteps, no voice, no shuffling. And I knocked again, harder, the sound bouncing down the hall. Then, with my heart pounding, I noticed that the tiny strip of light beneath her door wasn't warm or yellow, but a cold bluish glow, the kind you get from old fluorescent tubes, and my hand brushed the lock only to feel it slightly warm, as if someone had touched it minutes before. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. The hallway was quiet, too quiet, and I had the sudden feeling that someone behind one of the doors was holding their breath. "Emma," I whispered, pressing my ear to the door, but only a faint mechanical hum came from inside. I pulled a small tool from the pocket of my coat, something I used when windows jammed at job sites, and with a careful push, I slid the latch back. The door opened just enough for me to slip inside, and what I saw froze my insides. Every light in the loft had been replaced with harsh, buzzing fluorescence, and the furniture was pushed toward the walls as if someone had searched the place in a hurry. But the worst part was the center of the room. A folding metal table covered in city planning documents, maps of old drainage tunnels, structural integrity reports, and photographs with red circles drawn around certain buildings Emma had been restoring. There were also sticky notes in handwriting that wasn't hers, and next to the table a laptop screen glowed with a paused video feed of what looked like an underground chamber made of brick and stone, dripping water dimly lit by a single swinging bulb. My skin crawled because the angle of the video suggested it was taken recently, like the camera had been set up to watch something. Or someone. As I stepped closer, I whispered, "Emma, where are you?" Even though I already knew she wouldn't answer, but what I didn't expect was the sudden rustle behind me, so soft I almost thought I imagined it, until a faint clink followed, the sound of metal brushing metal. I turned sharply toward the kitchen area where the shadows seemed thicker, but before I could move, my boot bumped something on the floor. Her bracelet, the one she never took off, a silver band engraved with the coordinates of the lake where her mother used to take her as a child, and seeing it lying abandoned stabbed through my chest like ice. I crouched, picked it up, and that's when the hum of the laptop shifted, the image flickering before switching to a live feed, revealing a man stepping into the underground chamber, his figure illuminated enough to show his tailored coat and polished shoes, not the clothing of a criminal hiding in tunnels, but of someone who held power, someone who made decisions in offices high above the city, someone who should have had nothing to do with my daughter's disappearance. He spoke to someone off-screen, his voice low and controlled. "She knows the location of the fourth chamber. We can't let her leave the city until the breach is sealed." A second voice responded, muffled, maybe through a radio. "And the father?" The man paused, turning his face toward the camera, as if he knew I was watching from miles away, and with a chilling calm he said, "Fathers are predictable. Fear will keep him home." My fists tightened because they didn't know me at all. Fear doesn't keep fathers home. Fear sends them straight into the fire. Suddenly, the video glitched and cut out, the screen going black, and the lights in the loft flickered violently, plunging the room into strobing shadows. And I felt movement behind me again, this time deliberate, confident. I spun around and saw the outline of a figure by the door, but before I could shout, the figure bolted down the hall, footsteps echoing. I chased after them, my heartbeat hammering like a war drum as I flew down the stairs and out onto the icy street. But the fog had thickened into a white wall, concealing the runner until their silhouette dissolved into the lamp glow. But what truly chilled me wasn't losing sight of them. It was realizing that the runner's gait, the way they held their shoulders stiff, was familiar. I'd seen that posture in old photos Emma showed me of her department director, a man who had praised her work publicly while quietly pushing her into riskier projects. A man who always smiled too wide when discussing preservation secrets of the city's foundations. I leaned against the cold brick wall, my breath heavy, my knuckles throbbing from clenching too hard. And that's when a quiet voice in my gut spoke clearly. They weren't just after her knowledge. They needed her silence. I knew, without a shred of doubt, that whatever was happening beneath Greybridge was bigger, older, and far more dangerous than missing documents. And if you're still listening, don't go anywhere, because what follows, well, it changed everything. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because this is only the beginning of the storm that swallowed us whole. The fog thickened until it felt like a living thing pressing against my skin as I moved deeper into Greybridge, following the faint echoes of the runner who had vanished moments earlier, and every instinct in my chest burned with the certainty that Emma's disappearance was tied to whatever slept beneath the city's foundations. But I had no idea just how far the roots of that truth spread until I reached the old municipal maintenance tunnel hidden behind a rusted warehouse, a place Emma once mentioned in passing as a structural weak point she wanted to inspect but had been denied access to by someone in the department. And as I forced open the corroded hatch, a foul breath of damp stone hit me, carrying the metallic scent of water that had been trapped underground for decades. And even though fear crawled up my spine, a father's determination burned hotter, pushing me down the narrow stairwell where each step sagged under my weight. The tunnel below was lit only by a sequence of flickering bulbs that hummed angrily, casting long, overlapping shadows that twitched across the walls like they were alive, and my heart hammered not just from fear but from the memory of the video feed, the underground chamber, the suited man, the mention of the fourth breach. Whatever that meant, it was clear these people believed Emma knew something critical. And if you're still here listening, don't look away now, because this is exactly where the nightmare sharpened its teeth. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because trust me, you're going to want every piece of what happened down there where light and truth barely reached. As I continued forward, the tunnel widened, revealing a massive iron gate secured by an industrial lock that looked recently installed, its metal too clean for such a neglected district. And just as I stepped closer, a voice echoed from the darkness beyond the grate. Weak, trembling, unmistakably hers. "Dad!" My chest caved in with a mix of relief and terror, and I slammed against the gate, shouting her name, my voice cutting through the stale air. Her reply was strained, like someone speaking through pain. "Please, don't come in here. They're watching." And before I could press her further, a harsh electric buzz sounded above me, and the bulbs snapped off with a violent pop, plunging everything into suffocating black. I reached for my phone, fumbling for the flashlight, when a spotlight ignited behind the grate, revealing not Emma but a monitor placed on a stacked pile of crates. The same suited man from the loft video staring directly into the camera with a calmness that made my blood run cold. "Mr. Hale," he said, his voice echoing artificially through hidden speakers, predictable, just as we anticipated. But I barely heard him because behind the monitor, chained to a support beam, pale and frightened, was Emma herself. And the moment our eyes met, something primal surged inside me, a force stronger than fear, stronger than logic. "She knows the locations of the structural breaches beneath the city," the man continued. "And if those collapse, the historic districts above would crumble. We need her cooperation. You, however, complicate matters." He signaled off-screen, and suddenly the ground trembled beneath my boots, dust sifting down from the ceiling like snow, an intentional threat showing they controlled the stability of the tunnels. "Let her go," I growled, gripping the bar so tightly my hands ached, but he merely smiled with that infuriating politician's smile, the kind that conceals entire graves' worth of secrets, and he said, "Your daughter refused to help us seal the breaches. She insisted the public deserved to know. That is inconvenient for us." Emma shouted hoarsely, They want to build over the collapse zones, Dad. They're hiding the damage to get federal grants. But before she could finish, someone off-screen yanked her chain, cutting her cry short. The man straightened his coat and continued, "She'll remain here until she agrees to cooperate. You, unfortunately, must forget her." And that was the moment something inside me snapped. Not a spark of anger, but an inferno, because fathers don't forget daughters. Fathers don't abandon blood. Fathers don't accept threats from men who hide underground like rodents. I looked around, desperate for leverage, and spotted an old emergency breaker box, partially concealed by mildew on the wall beside the grate. Without hesitation, I slammed my boot into it, metal crunching under the force, and the entire corridor roared with the sudden surge of overload as lights blew, sparks exploded, alarms wailed, and the grate's lock clicked once, then twice, disengaging. The suited man's composure finally cracked as he leaned into the camera, shouting, "Stop him!" But by then I was already throwing my shoulder into the gate, pushing it open with the strength I didn't know remained in my aging bones. I rushed inside, grabbing a discarded pipe and swinging it across the jaw of the guard holding Emma's chain, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the chamber. And he collapsed instantly. I tore the chain from the hook and wrapped my arms around her trembling frame, whispering, "I've got you! I've got you!" even as the chamber's alarms screamed around us. Above us, dust rained from the shaking ceiling, the structural breach growing unstable from the overload I triggered. And Emma whispered, terrified, "Dad, if this collapses, we'll both die." But I shook my head fiercely, tightening my hold on her. "Not tonight. Not like this. Not while I'm breathing." And I guided her quickly toward the service exit, indicated on one of the blueprints she once showed me. But the suited man wasn't done. He stepped out from the shadows near the far wall, wielding a metal baton, his expression twisted with frustration, and hissed, "You've doomed the whole district." Lunging at us with surprising speed, I shoved Emma behind me and blocked his swing with the pipe, the impact numbing my arm, but adrenaline fueled me and I countered with a blow to his ribs, sending him staggering. The chamber groaned again as another tremor tore through its foundation, chunks of brick falling dangerously close, and I yelled for Emma to run, pushing her toward the exit ladder while keeping myself between her and the collapsing chamber. The suited man lunged again, this time aiming for my head, but I ducked, grabbed him by the coat, and slammed him against the reinforced column, hard enough to knock the baton from his hand. "You've endangered thousands," he wheezed, but I spat back. "No, you did when you built lies on top of broken stone." And with the chamber rumbling violently, I sprinted toward Emma, who had already climbed partway up the ladder, reaching for me with trembling fingers. I grabbed her hand, feeling her strength return despite the fear, and together we scaled the shaft as the chamber finally gave way beneath us, collapsing in a deafening roar of stone and metal. We burst through the hatch into the freezing night air, coughing, shaking, alive, and as the ground trembled from the collapse beneath, Emma clutched my coat and sobbed, "I thought I'd never see you again." And I held her so tight I thought she might break, whispering, "You'll never face darkness alone again, not while I'm here." The sirens that wailed across Greybridge that night weren't police. They were emergency alerts triggered by the collapse, and within hours Emma's documents, maps, and evidence were enough to expose the entire network of corruption the suited man represented, leading to a federal investigation that rattled the city's foundations more violently than the tunnel breaches ever could. And months later, as Emma stood beside me during the city's restoration hearing, her testimony not just brave but unstoppable, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "You saved me." But I shook my head because the truth was simpler and older than anything written in their legal reports. "No, Emma, you saved yourself. I just followed my heart. And as the cameras flashed and the officials scrambled to salvage their reputations, I looked at my daughter, the woman who survived the dark, and felt something warm spread across my chest, something I thought had died with her mother. Hope. And now that you've heard what happened in those tunnels and how close we came to losing everything, don't forget to subscribe because there are stories buried in this city deeper than those chambers. And if you stay with me, I'll tell you every one of them.